What's going on, guys? JSkeleton here with Random Gas Day, coming at you with an insane Zelda Breath of the Wild theory for you guys, my friends. Today we're going to be theorizing of who Link is in Breath of the Wild, as well as the timeline placement. It's going to be a little bit of a two-in-one, two birds, one stone, if you will. We're going to try to keep it as condensed as possible, but do keep in mind that there is a ton of information, and I'm going to try to make it as brief and as condensed and on point as possible. Before we jump into it, I want to give a special thanks and shout out to my subscriber, Brack T. Jones. He came into one of my streams the other night, and he provided this concept, this idea, as well as a couple different, plots to it. And so I went crazy. I went researching like nuts, and I pieced together a whole story, a whole explanation, and I pieced together a ton of information to provide you guys and present you guys with this theory. So what is the theory? The theory is that Link from Breath of the Wild and Ocarina of Time are the same Link. The hero of time is Link in Breath of the Wild. Now I know that seems a little bit insane at first glance, but let me explain the details, and it makes complete sense. I promise you guys you'll be convinced by the end of this, as well as the timeline placements. We're going to play those two different theories together as they go kind of hand in hand. So we're going to jump into the story. I'm going to give you guys some evidence, some details to back it all up, and hopefully by the end of this you will be convinced. So we know from the timeline, okay, we have the official timeline from Nintendo that at the end of Ocarina of Time, the timeline splits into three sections. You got the hero is defeated, so if we fail against defeating Ganon, the hero is successful, which splits into the child era and the adult era. Now, it is very evident in Breath of the Wild's trailers that Link has been asleep for 100 years.
I think you are now ready to hear what happened 100 years ago.
So 100 years have passed since he has been asleep, and he is asleep where? In the Shrine of Resurrection. Resurrection means to be resurrected, to be made alive again, to be brought back from fatal wounds, to be healed, recovered, whatever you want to call it. And so that in and of itself, that name and where Link wakes up in the Shrine of Resurrection, in and of itself is evident that Link had, prior to this, to Breath of the Wild, had fought Ganon and failed. He got defeated, and obviously had fatal wounds and needed to be placed in the Shrine of Resurrection. So who placed him there? Zelda and the Sheikah would have placed him there. Obviously we see Sheikah symbols all over the Shrine of Resurrection, and especially in Breath of the Wild. And we know that Zelda has very deep ties and connections to the Sheikah, as when she was disguised as Sheik in Ocarina of Time, she had that same symbol on her chest that we see all over Breath of the Wild. It's the most common symbol that we've been seeing plastered all over Breath of the Wild stuff, and we also see it in the bed that Link is laying in the Shrine of Resurrection. So therefore, Zelda, with the help of the Sheikah, would have placed him into the Shrine of Resurrection, as the Sheikah have some very advanced technology. And after doing so, Zelda would have taken the Master Sword, which we see actually a picture of on the back of the special edition of Breath of the Wild. She takes the Master Sword and places it into the pedestal in front of the Deku Tree, and then perhaps the sages then seal her to preserve her for 100 years until it's time to wake up with Link and fight Ganon once more. So that is probably how Zelda is preserved over the years. Now, as far as the Master Sword goes, we know that in Zelda Breath of the Wild, the Master Sword is in a state of ruin, and so the only timeline we ever see the Master Sword in a damaged state where we need to repair it is in the Downfall timeline. For example, A Link to the Past. Also, the only timeline we ever see the Master Sword anywhere else but the Temple of Time is also in the Downfall timeline. And again, previously mentioned, Zelda had placed the damaged Master Sword in a pedestal in front of the Deku Tree. So keep that in mind as well. As far as Ganon goes, as soon as the hero and Zelda were defeated at the end of Ocarina of Time, those 7 sages that we saved through Ocarina of Time would have instantly sealed Ganon into the Sacred Realm, because Ganon defeated the hero and Zelda. He took control and took over the Golden Triforce, and so right away the 7 sages used their power to seal Ganon in the Sacred Realm, which then kind of ties into the Imprisoning War, which again goes into the Downfall timeline. So in the Imprisoning War, Hyrule enjoys a brief period of peace. Okay, so keep in mind, Link is in the Shrine of Resurrection, being recovering from his fatal wounds, and Zelda is most likely being sealed by the 7 sages, kind of like the way Link was sealed for 7 years in Ocarina of Time. Well, she's being sealed by the 7 sages somewhere for 100 years until it's time to wake up again. And so during this time, Hyrule enjoys a brief time of peace. And so during this time of peace is when the people rebuild Hyrule. And so whether the hero is defeated or whether he was successful, the architect who would have been in charge of rebuilding Hyrule would have existed either way. And so let's say the hero is successful, he could have just rebuilt Hyrule or updated it, if you will, to make it look like, you know, what we see Castletown in Twilight Princess if it was that timeline split. Now, if the hero was defeated, the architect still would have existed, and, you know, obviously Hyrule would have been in ruins and the hero was defeated, and so he would have rebuilt Hyrule again as Castletown as we see it in Twilight Princess. So either way, that kind of explains why we see the Twilight Princess fountain and Bridge of Eldin and different architecture in both timelines and in both games. Now, that said, the period of peace in the land of Hyrule was for a brief time, as mentioned in the Imprisoning War, and Ganon was gaining more power during his concealment in the Sacred Realm. Eventually, the Seven Sages could no longer keep him confined to the Sacred Realm, and Ganon therefore broke the seal. At this point, the people and the Sheikah were very desperate, as, you know, it was a desperate hour. The hero was in the Shrine of Resurrection. There was no one to save Hyrule, and Zelda was obviously being preserved as well wherever she was. And so the Sheikah, in this desperate hour, as mentioned on the back of the map that comes with special Master Editions of Breath of the Wild, the text reads about, you know, the Sheikah awakening 4 divine beasts and commanding the Guardians to attack Ganon, as again, it was a desperate hour. There was no one to save them. So at this point, Ganon, with his evil power, takes control of the Guardians and destroys the rebuilt Hyrule, which is what we see some gameplay, some footage of in one of the most recent Breath of the Wild trailers. Somehow the Sheikah managed to seal Ganon, which is now known as the Calamity Ganon, for reaping calamity across the land. They managed to seal him in Hyrule Castle, and that is with the help of the fact that Hyrule Castle is the divine place, and so the power there is able to keep him sealed for many years. Now, at this point, 100 years have passed since the defeat of Link and Zelda in Ocarina of Time, and the Sheikah, the sages, the people, whoever else around knows that the Calamity Ganon cannot be contained in Hyrule Castle forever. He's gonna eventually break the seal of that as well. So Zelda is then awoken from her slumber, from her concealment, and then she proceeds to go and awaken Link, as we can see at the beginning of Breath of the Wild. She says, "Wake up, Link, open your eyes."
Wake up, Link.
And we see that again at the beginning of Breath of the Wild, and this is where an interesting quote is taking place. Now, before I mention this, I want to go back to Ocarina of Time. In Ocarina of Time, when Link and Zelda are children, she's telling him a story, and this is what she says to Link. "But suddenly a ray of light shot out of the forest, parted the clouds, and lit up the ground. The light turned into a figure holding a green and shining stone, followed by a fairy. I know this is a prophecy that someone would come from the forest. Yes, I thought you might be the one." So she's referring to Link as this figure who is basically a shining light. Now, at the beginning of Breath of the Wild, just before you leave the Shrine of Resurrection, Zelda proceeds to say to Link, "Link, you are the light, our light, that must shine upon Hyrule once again." Again, my friends. So this had happened previously. You know, Link was to shine upon Hyrule, and unfortunately he was defeated again at the end of Ocarina of Time. But this is his time to once and for all go fight Ganon a second time and conceal him once and for all. Now, is this the same Ganon? I want to show you guys a couple different pictures. Look at the picture of Ganon at the end of Ocarina of Time, his final form that we fight. This would have been where we most likely failed, okay? So you can see Ganon there. Look at the way his beast form is shaped. Look at his horns. Now look at the one in Breath of the Wild. And the one in Breath of the Wild, he looks almost identical, okay? He has the same shape of horns, the same beastly shape, and it's almost identical to a T. So this, again, ties into the fact that I believe this is the exact same Ganon from the end of Ocarina of Time, the final form that we fought, which is probably the part where we failed as the hero of time. So Furthermore, regarding the Hero of Time, this one's very interesting. Back at E3, during Nintendo Treehouse's live stream, they were playing Breath of the Wild, and one of the representatives encountered a gate within a shrine and jokingly said, oh no, there's a gate, I guess we can't save Hyrule. The other representative said, oh no, Hero of Time, where are you going? Now, take a quick look at the clip so you guys can hear it for yourself and then tell me what you think.
Now, I have this gate here is in the way. Oh well, sorry, can't save Hyrule. It's over. Nope.
No, going home. Hero of Time, where are you going? Hero of Time, where are you going?
So there you guys have it. Clear as day, they said, oh no, Hero of Time, where are you going? You could say that maybe they have no idea who the Hero of Time is, but I would highly argue that. I would say that someone who works for Nintendo, especially someone who plays Nintendo games, you know, as part of the Treehouse Live team, would most likely know who the Hero of Time is. They would know the difference. I think, very strongly believe that they have some, you know, more information than we have, which would make sense. They work for Nintendo, and they've probably played the game more. They probably had a chance to play it more, and they probably have been given more information than we have to some extent, and perhaps they know something that we don't know. Perhaps they know that this is the Hero of Time based on some, you know, extra gameplay that they have played or seen, or more information that they have, you know, heard within the company. So I would strongly argue that this was legitimate information, and it was just a slip of the tongue that they accidentally said something not meaning to, and very interesting stuff. And before we close out the video, let me tackle a couple concerns or questions that may be brought up. What about the fact that Link is left-handed in Ocarina of Time and right-handed in Breath of the Wild? Well, like I said, there's a very high chance that when you have amnesia, your brain forgets how to do things a certain way. So it is very plausible that Link forgotten how to wield a sword in his left hand, and therefore he just took it up in his right hand in Breath of the Wild. This is something that Nintendo could have purposely done to purposely trick us and try to kind of throw us a curveball into, you know, thinking, well, this doesn't make sense. But it does make sense, because again, Link is in a state of amnesia. He doesn't know anything, which ties into one of the other things I want to mention is the Deku Tree. So at the very beginning of Ocarina of Time, the very first temple we take on is the Deku Tree, and he then dies, but a Deku Sprout pops up and takes his place. And so this Deku Sprout would have been about 100 years later a full-grown Deku Tree, as we see in Breath of the Wild. And we do see the Deku Tree very briefly in the Breath of the Wild trailer, and he also says this to Link. He says, your face tells me that you have no recollection of me. So that means the Deku Tree knows who Link is. He's seen him in Ocarina of Time, but Link doesn't remember him, because again, Link is in a state of amnesia. Now, you might say, what about the Koroks? What about the Koroks? They're in the Wind Waker timeline. Well, if you look up the definition of Koroks, Koroks are basically Kokiri that over the years turned into Koroks. That's basically what Koroks are. And so, therefore, it is very plausible, since Kokiri were in Ocarina of Time, that the Koroks could have been in either timeline, because again, they turned into Kokiri over a period of time. So we see them in Wind Waker. We just so happen to not have seen them in any other timeline until now. But again, 100 years later, Kokiri could have most easily turned into Koroks by the time Breath of the Wild takes place. The very final thing I want to mention is that the Link to the Past manual, part of it that's Japanese translated to English, kind of talks about a little bit of the backstory to A Link to the Past. And one part says, however, Ganon's noxious gas advanced even to the land of Hyrule. Now, if you look at the Breath of the Wild Ganon, you can see he has some kind of purple looking gas around him. It looks toxic, it looks poisonous to me, it looks noxious. And so imagine we seal Ganon at the end of Breath of the Wild. We do defeat him, but we know that in the Downfall timeline that Ganon constantly re-breaks that seal. So we seal him at the end of Breath of the Wild, but eventually, prior to A Link to the Past, he breaks that seal, and is that noxious gas that we see around him in Breath of the Wild, it advances to the land of Hyrule, which then sparks A Link to the Past. So for all of these reasons, I strongly believe that the timeline placement for Breath of the Wild takes place right before A Link to the Past, but right after Ocarina of Time in the Downfall timeline. So that's my theory, my friends. That is what I think. Again, that's where I think the Breath of the Wild timeline placement is. I strongly believe that the Link in Ocarina of Time and Breath of the Wild are the same ones. I believe Breath of the Wild's Link is the Hero of Time, which would be so exciting. Obviously, time will tell as we get more information, we get our hands on the game. But let me know what you guys think about that theory in the comment section below. If you guys enjoyed the video, please smash the like button, subscribe to the comment, share, and all the awesome stuff. One thing's for sure is that I am extremely excited to get my hands on Breath of the Wild come March 3rd. You know we're going to be playing a lot of it on the channel, as well as playing it on the Nintendo Switch, the brand new Nintendo console. So I will catch you guys in the next video like always. Until then, Game on.
Open your eyes. Wake up, Link.